Now, in addition to running individual functions locally, we can also run the whole application on our machine. And to do this, we need to use Serverless Offline plugin. And when we use it and we run our application locally, it will emulate API Gateway and AWS Lambda behavior. And it will start a local web server, and when this web server receives requests, it will call Lambda functions locally on our machine. And this is quite a feature-rich plugin. It supports authorizers, Lambda integration, it supports CORS, velocity templates, and so on. And by using Serverless Offline, we can use local debugging, we can attach a debugger to a local process, step through functions, and try to find a root cause of an issue we want to debug. In addition to that, it can also work with plugins that emulate other services, because if we run our application locally, we might want to emulate services like DynamoDB, Kinesis, SNS, and so on. So what do we need to do to run our serverless application locally? Well, first of all, we need to add Serverless Offline plugin that will emulate API Gateway and AWS Lambda locally. But we also need to add plugins for other services that we want to emulate. And in our case, this is Serverless DynamoDB Local that will emulate DynamoDB. And we can also specify on which port to run our application. And to do this, we need to add a field under Serverless Offline under Custom field. Now, once we have the configuration in place, we can first of all start our DynamoDB, but before we can start it, we need to install it locally. To do this, we need to run serverless DynamoDB install, which will download binaries for running local DynamoDB, and then we can start it using serverless DynamoDB start. Once we have our database, we can run serverless offline, which will start the local development server, and we can send requests to this server instead of sending it to API Gateway. Now, Serverless Offline plugin can be a very useful tool, but there are a few issues with local execution of serverless applications. Well, the first one is that Serverless Offline plugin doesn't emulate Lambda and API Gateway completely. There are a few subtle differences between local execution and actual API Gateway. And the second issue is that if we run our application locally, it will run on a local Node.js environment, which can be different from the Node.js environment used in AWS. And the last one is when we run our application locally, it will rely on local emulation of other AWS services. And those local versions can differ from AWS services in some subtle ways. So, for example, local DynamoDB that we will use in the next demo has subtle differences in its API comparing to real DynamoDB. So while it can be a useful tool, we need to deploy to AWS to test our application fully.